We live. We are live, I think. Yeah. Great. Yeah, it's exciting to be here. I'm Inder, the CEO and co-founder of Pixelynx, which is a new gaming venture that we launched with myself, Deadmau5, Richie Hawtin, and a number of other icons from the music and gaming industry. And our vision is really to look at how the metaverse will create a new canvas for artists to express themselves. I think, at the moment, in a way, music feels like very archaic. It's a very traditional format that hasn't really changed. And we think the potential of NFTs and gaming is going to unlock a whole new wave of creativity with artists being able to express themselves through a number of different ways. And today we'll talk about interactive NFTs and also show you some examples of what we're building. So before I continue, none of the information here is investment advice or can be used or should be used for investment purposes. Just useful to put that out there before we jump in. So yeah, what is an NFT? I guess this is a good way to kind of start the discussion before we move into thinking about what an interactive NFT is. One way of thinking about an NFT is imagine it as a digital asset that's stored on the blockchain and it's unique. And it's important to then dig into that a little bit more. Why does it need to be stored on the blockchain, and what's the value of that? And we'll touch on some of that in a second. But alongside an NFT being this asset on the blockchain, it's really important to understand that it's powered by what's called a smart contract. And it's in this smart contract that all of the magic happens, you could say, because the smart contract holds all of this information about the NFT. For example, it tells you who the original owner of it is. It tells you the history of sales and can hold a lot of other interesting metadata that could potentially be used for creative purposes. At the moment, many people are thinking about NFTs as here's a JPEG, and it tells you, who the owner of the JPEG is and when was the thing created. But what we'll show you over the next few examples is through embedding information into the smart contract, you can start to create these really interesting dynamic pieces of art that can change, and they're contextual. And I'll show you that in a second. And it's what we mean by when we say what is an interactive NFT. It's something that's dynamic. It's not static in a sense. It can change, and it has multiple different dimensions, and its form is never fixed. A really good example that we can jump in with is a project that Richie Hawtin worked on called Infin1. I wouldn't even try and read the full name out. But it's a really exciting collaboration between John Gerard, who's an artist, and Richie Hawtin. And the idea was they created this artwork, which you can see here. It's the serpent making the infinity symbol. And what would happen is it would take a whole year to watch that infinity loop basically unfold. And it was really interesting because what they also started to do is the visuals and the music would change based on certain data. So based on the seasons, the visuals would change and the music would change. And all of that was actually embedded into the smart contract. It wasn't just this concept of something that was just made as a piece of art, but actually would say it knows what the date is and the month is, and therefore the artwork would change based upon the information that was then stored in this smart contract. It's a really interesting idea. And as an artist, I think will open up a new way of thinking about how you create art, because it's not just the asset anymore. You now have the smart contract. You have this piece of code, and the two can work together to create this interesting dynamic experience that isn't static. And I think that's what people are really excited about in this space is this is what to me feels like a whole new canvas for artists to express themselves. I mentioned earlier, I think this is a really important point to kind of touch on, is the NFT changes based on the data stored within the smart contract. So you can start to encode tons of different information in it. As I mentioned, you can say who's the original owner, but you can also start to create interesting other connections. So for example, you could say, here is a piece of artwork, and if it's daytime, it sounds like this. There's no drums. And you can say, if it's nighttime, if someone's listening to it, the drums come in. And this is just a simple idea of trying to think about how you can create these dynamic experiences by taking data and connecting them to the concept of how art could be potentially constantly evolving. A lot of this space and a lot of the trends that we're seeing are also driven by generative and procedural algorithms. And so if you're excited and interested in thinking about dynamic art and how that can link to music, I would definitely look into the concept of generative algorithms and how they can be used to create interesting new experiences. I'll show you one example. This is a project that we worked on with deadmau5, and it was a really fun idea. I think it was the first of its kind in terms of what we did. And essentially, we launched 5,555 deadmau5 heads as avatars. So you can see them in the top left over there. Every owner of the NFT also got a 3D asset file. And alongside this, we then also created integrations with hundreds of different games. So if you owned that piece of artwork, you could also use it in all of these different environments. And you can consider that to be dynamic in some sense. It has a different functionality. So if I was in one world, in one game, it would look like the avatar. But if I was in a game called The Sandbox, you can see it in the bottom right, my avatar would actually, my NFT would actually look like something different. And so that's an interesting example, right? It's like the asset is just one thing. The actual smart contract can allow it to be many different things. And so owning the NFT head could mean something different in each platform that you go into. So you can start to think about it, like decouple the asset and the file from the actual smart contract, and what you can do with that code is very interesting, and we can dig into it in some of the questions. But what I loved about this project was, we launched it, it was super successful, all of his fans kind of got in and were super excited about the project, but what we started to see was fans started to not just own the NFTs, but they started to build their own technology on top of it. And this is why I think NFTs are super exciting for the future of innovation, right? What happened in this context was, if you own the NFT, you could actually build things on top of it. Imagine the NFT, as I mentioned, it's like code. Imagine it like a Lego brick. And we have this framework for NFTs, which is just open source code. You don't necessarily need to own the IP to be able to build on top of it. So what happened was a fan held this NFT and decided, I'm going to make a web AR camera for anyone who owns this NFT to be able to wear the deadmau5 head. And it instantly went viral within the deadmau5 community. Hundreds and thousands of fans started basically downloading this app and experiencing the head as in AR mode. The thing that really excited me about this whole process was the fans took ownership of it. They started to build their own technology, and we didn't tell them what to do. They just basically decided, well, why don't we just build a piece of technology? Why don't we build a web AR camera? And so what you'll see with NFTs is it will unlock some really interesting examples of innovation that can change the form. And it's not just up to the creator anymore to decide what it is. Your fans can start to build on top of it. They can say, oh, this is really cool. Like, I love that file that you've created, or that, whatever it is, the NFT. How can they start to create new experiences on top of it? And we've never seen anything like this before, I think, at this level, where it will really unlock a new way for fan-artist relationships to unfold. Super exciting. So I'll jump in a little bit and tell you what we're building at Pixelynx and how we're building interesting AR experiences that we think fans will be able to collect. So the idea behind what we're developing is it's a mobile game built on what's called the Niantic Lightship technology. And essentially what you can do is explore the world like you would in a game like Pokemon Go and start to basically unlock exclusive AR content. And we see this as a whole new canvas for artists to express themselves and a new way for them to release music and also tell the story around their work. I'll show you one or two examples here. This is just a simple, fun way for an artist to think about, okay, I'm going to launch a new piece of content. How can they use the context of the world to create this interesting experience? And this was really interesting because essentially what we're looking at is the canvas isn't just your art anymore. Now with these kinds of experiences, the canvas could technically be the world. You could look at a building and say, how could I release my music to react with the building and the world around me? And we think this is really interesting and will unlock new ways for artists to be creative, essentially. This is another example, again, thinking about how could you use the physical world to create interesting new experiences. And all of this, as I mentioned, is released as an NFT, but it can be dynamic. So if I'm in New York and I choose to point my phone at a building in New York, it's going to look slightly different to how it looked in a different place. And it's using this interesting blend of now we have NFTs, but we also have the real world to build on top of. And so a big focus of ours and what we'd like to speak to a lot of artists about is, think about your art and your creativity. How you make music, how you produce is one thing, but now start to just augment it. Like, how could you look at things like smart contracts and start to create interesting new relationships between your music and the code that you can embed into a smart contract. And then you can start to take new platforms. So if someone owns one of your NFTs, maybe when they enter our platform, it looks like this. But when they enter another platform like the Sandbox or a different game, it could be something completely different. And this is what we mean by when we say dynamic. There's on the blockchain, we have the NFT, which is stored, and any platform can technically access that information. So owning this NFT, it could do one thing in one place, it could do something else somewhere else. So it allows you to start to think about the different dimensions that you have as an artist to play with. So one of the things that we would suggest as an interesting starting point in terms of your exploration around NFTs and thinking about dynamic NFTs is one, just start mood boarding some ideas. I would start with this idea of saying, okay, well, first I have an asset, which could be a piece of artwork. And then I have other things, like I have an NFT, I have experiences, it could be augmented reality, it could be anything in between. And just start to think about the connections between how all of these experiences connect. How could I create something that could change? And what kind of changes would you want to potentially embed in there? I gave you one example, which is, here's a song that you release, and if you listen to it in the day, there's no bass line and there's no drums, and if you listen to it past 6 p.m., maybe there's a drum and everything else kind of kicks in. And that's just a really simple idea that you could technically build on the blockchain as this dynamic, constantly evolving piece of art. And there's a really interesting opportunity, I think, for artists to push the boundaries in this new space and start creating things that we've never really seen before, but really unlock a new style of creativity. So yeah, definitely start with this process of mood boarding. Think about all these different canvases. As I mentioned, we're building allows you to create interesting new AR experiences on buildings and the physical world around you. One of the processes we work with different artists is they take pictures of buildings that maybe mean something to them or just in their local area, and start thinking about how the relationship could change between you actually using that as a canvas to release your music. Traditionally, you might think about releasing your music on Spotify, but what if you could release your music through augmented reality and it was projected onto the largest building in your city? Like, what does that mean? How could that change the way you think about your music and its place in the world around you? One example of an artist that we're working with at the moment, they are looking at a building and turning the building into a sequencer. So when you point your phone at the building, all of the windows will actually be a sequencer to put a drum beat in. And so what would happen if you go to that building and point your phone at it, it will suddenly just start playing a sequence of sounds as if it was a 909 or 808. It's really interesting because once they've made that, another fan could turn up to that building, point their phone, and listen to the track that someone has just created and put on top of this building. So it's an interesting new dynamic that we're starting to explore and really thinking about how do you take experiences in the physical world and NFTs and start changing the way artists think about their music. So I wanted to, we'll touch on this actually in a second in terms of an avatar and the role avatars can play in this new environment. But you can kind of sense, a big thing around what we're talking about is this canvas as an artist is extremely broad, and you can reimagine your music in so many different ways. I think fundamentally what NFTs and the metaverse will do is set music free from these archaic formats, and it's not like we're going to get rid of MP3s and WAV files, but free in a sense that will unlock a new way for artists to think about how their music is released. And using all of these tools starts to connect the dots between art, gaming, technology, and really create a new format. And I think for many artists, the opportunity right now is really infinite to be creative. One of the things we always suggest is it's a really multidisciplinary space and requires, sometimes artists to work with AI experts and even coders and developers to bring these experiences to life. But I would embrace it because this is really what makes the space so interesting is, how often would you have an economist and an AI expert and a musician and a manager in the same room discussing art? It just typically, I think for most people, it doesn't compute. You're like, why would I do that? And this is now the world that we're living in. And many artists that you would consider to be I guess, more traditional, are really embracing this new technology as a way for them to rethink what their music could look like and how it would feel, and how fans would have some level of ownership in that whole experience through what we think of as dynamic NFTs and dynamic experiences. So I wanted to touch on an avatar tool called Ready Player Me. This is something that's super exciting. It's a platform that we're building on, and it's a really interesting way to kind of dive into this space and start creating your first kind of metaverse experience, if you will. I think having an avatar for many people will kind of become a prerequisite, I assume, in like 5 to 10 years when everyone fully embraces this space. So there's a lot of different tools that you can play with, and I'll show you a very lighthearted, fun one, but a really interesting, powerful tool that will allow you to create some pretty dynamic experiences off the back of it, and it's called Ready Player Me. So I'll jump in. It's a free tool. You can go on. It's called, basically readyplayer.me is the website. And essentially what you can do is you can enter into this hub, and let's see if we've got this here. So what you can do, you basically choose your body type. I will choose masculine. You can take a picture, which I won't do right now. But yeah, you can basically take a picture and upload an image of yourself. And what it will do is basically create an avatar in about 15 seconds based on your image. So this is interesting, right? You'll see this kind of load up in about 5 to 10 seconds. Essentially what will happen at the end of this process is you will have this digital file as an avatar, fully interactive 3D version of yourself. And you can change it up, you can add some clothes to it, kind of see what you can adjust over here. It's really, really interesting and a pretty cool foundation to get started with. So you have an avatar, which is one of the first steps, and at this next stage, you can basically download this file as what's called a GLB file, which can then be used in hundreds, if not thousands, of different platforms. So technically, you can start even performing as this avatar if you wanted to, just through a webcam. Like you can literally turn your camera on your phone, on your laptop or computer, and it will instantly recognize your body, and you can pretty much use this as a digital version of yourself. And there's many different ways this could go. You can kind of play with it. You can create a virtual version. You can maybe create like an interactive gaming experience or a music video or anything in between. But it's a really fun starting point as you start to kind of explore and experiment with what the metaverse is and NFTs and everything in between, is potentially just jumping in and starting with either the process of creating an avatar and then thinking about how would that potentially be used across all of these different platforms and what could you do with it. Of course, you can sell digital merchandise, which is fun. I've got some examples here with some brands. But yeah, it's super interesting. And essentially, once you finish this process, what will happen is it will prepare an avatar for you, and you can basically download this file to essentially utilize this across dozens of platforms. And we're using the same avatar tool in our system right now. So you'll see it if I click this download file. Essentially, what happens is you get this GLB file, and that, if you Google it, you'll kind of see where you can use it. This can be used in, like I said, probably thousands, if not millions, of different platforms. Like you can take this straight into 3D editing tools and start to tweak it and shape it. And it's a great way to start thinking about the spaces. Of course, there's one end, which is the content, but the other side of NFTs is the file format. And how can those file formats, like GLB files or GLTF, or there's many others, how can they be used as part of your NFT experience? And that will allow you to do some really interesting things with basically taking your assets and giving fans the ability to experience it in hundreds, if not, you can kind of see an example here. These are all the different games that are using this avatar system. And there's many more, but it'll give you a good idea around this concept of interoperability, which is a really fundamental idea around the NFT space and Web3. And interoperability basically just means something can be used across multiple different platforms. So you can have an NFT, and it's not really that meaningful if the only place I can use it is one website. What's really exciting about this new trend and everything that we're talking about in regards to dynamic NFTs is it could be launched in one place, but it has utility in hundreds, if not thousands, of other places. And that gives you a lot of creative freedom to some extent to kind of think about this experience being more than just one thing. So I could create this avatar, and I'll skip back for a second, actually, just to touch on the example that we mentioned earlier with deadmau5 was, we launched these NFTs, and yeah, they were great. They looked like one thing, but over the course of 6 months, they became many different things, right? It just started off with some cool heads, and then it became a voxelized backpack that you could use in a game called The Sandbox, and then it became a web AR experience that was made by fans. And this is really fundamentally one of the most important pillars of why NFTs are really interesting, is it's kind of open source in many ways, and people can build on top of it. And you can start to say, well, maybe, today I'm going to launch it, and this is my art. This is what it looks like. But, many people are like perfectionists, and it's hard to get to that point of really feeling happy with what you've made. But with this, it gives you a little bit of freedom. You can kind of go, well, hey, I've launched it. This is, really happy with where this is, but maybe in 6 months I want to remix it and have a different version of it and a different experience that you can have in this other platform. And so it allows you to kind of almost mold this piece of art, this experience that you've created over time. It doesn't have to be finished in day one, which is what I love about this whole ecosystem is, this project, even though we launched it in October, it still isn't finished. It's just constantly evolving. Every month and every week, we're thinking about new integrations and new ways for fans to experience it. But it was literally just 5,555 NFTs, which is a really interesting idea, right? As an artist, to have this kind of freedom to say, well, yeah, I'm not going to be tied to the asset type anymore. I have this ability to kind of launch it and make sure that you're happy with it, but for it to evolve with you as an artist as you start to grow and progress with your creative journey, which is just, I find that paradigm is very interesting, and I think it will change the way artists think about their music and their craft. So I'm going to jump in for some questions, and then we can kind of jump back in. Does anyone have any questions around NFTs or dynamic NFTs or anything in between? Yep.
I have one question for you. Can you explain in more detail what it means when users can create applications on top of base NFTs?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a stack?
Yes.
Is there a user interface?
Right.
Modify NFTs or templates?
It's a great question. So the idea that users can build on top of NFTs is, it touches on this idea, without using buzzwords, this concept of composability. It's a really important this idea around the blockchain. And essentially, like I said, thinking about NFTs as building blocks of pieces of code. And fundamentally in the blockchain, the blockchain is a public database, the best way to imagine it, right? So if someone mints something as an NFT, that's available to find on a public blockchain, on a public database like you would go to Wikipedia or anything else. And so I can go into this project, I can see the smart contract that this project was made on and the code that this basically was minted on. So it tells me where the asset file is, it tells me who the owners are, it tells me how the project works as a piece of code available in the public domain. And I can then basically take that and say, great, I know what I know the building blocks, I know the Lego bricks that made that project, and this is the code. So now if I wanted to create another experience, I just need to reference that contract, that smart contract, and you can start to create these interesting feedback loops between just NFT projects that have been launched and then your platforms and experiences that you're building. They just reference the smart contract, basically. So there's this kind of beautiful side of things just being public and available out, in the world for anyone to access, and that will unlock so much innovation, right? It's like there's all of this amazing stuff that's out there, which you can kind of go, yeah, I'm going to build on top of it. I'm going to create a new product or a new experience, and you don't technically need, approval. In many cases, like with this, we incentivized it. Like we told fans, do it, like build stuff, and we'll reward you, and we'll find interesting new ways to work together. And so the creator community then just dove in. They were like, great, give us assets, give us a link to where the code is, and so yeah, that's essentially the idea. So the NFTs are basically minted on a public blockchain, and that code is available for anyone to basically access and utilize however they want. Some people may create, crazy, wild ideas, and others may just use it to simply understand the financial movement of value within the smart contract. They will literally just build an app that tells you how data is being, how much money have people spent on the NFT. You can break it down in so many different ways.
Thanks. Is it working? Yeah. I have a question regarding the trademark. I suppose head is trademarked, is a trademark. And if you have a trademark, you have to defend your trademark against other people using your trademark without your permission. So how does deadmau5 look at his trademark now? Because he's losing it, I think.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I can't speak on behalf of deadmau5's legal strategy around trademark management, but what I would say is it's a great question because, you know, as we move into this world, what's kind of underlying a lot of it is this concept of decentralization, that everything kind of is available and people can build on top of it. And I may own that NFT, but I don't own deadmau5's brand, and I can't technically monetize deadmau5's brand. So a lot of this has to be disclosed up front. Like, fans need to know where the line is drawn. Like, what can you do? Like, we're happy for this because this is amazing. It's a great example of innovation, and it's the community deciding what they want. If they try to monetize that, then, you know, there's maybe certain challenges because now it crosses a kind of line that is a little bit more difficult to play with.
But incentivizing the use of your trademark, that means that you are going to lose your trademark, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. You know, when we think about the space and intellectual property and what it means in Web3, I think there's still a lot of question marks in that. And, you know, I kind of mentioned it earlier, there's this fundamental idea of ownership. But what does ownership mean? Because you don't technically own the trademark, you don't own the IP, but you own the NFT. And that gives you certain rights of usage. And so this just needs to be defined. Now, the idea that someone's trademark could be lost, I don't think so. I think if anything, it strengthens the value of their trademark because what you start to see is this huge acceleration of people building and utilizing the IP in interesting new ways. But it works in different ways for different artists, I think, fundamentally.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Got one in the back? Yep.
The use case for deadmau5 is great, and I appreciate seeing that. What about for younger artists, newer artists who are just coming up? Obviously, deadmau5 got a lot of exposure, got a lot of advantages. But are there good use cases around emerging artists, and what's been successful for some of those younger emerging artists? I mean, deadmau5 has got that iconography that a lot of artists still have. So
yeah, it's a great question. So if you're an emerging artist coming into the NFT space, you know, you're having to build up an audience, and that can be hard. What I think is interesting, there's two things I'll touch on. One is, currently the NFT space is tiny. I mean, there's not that many collectors in the world. There's not that many people who even have a wallet or have the understanding to create an NFT, let alone even think about how you design an amazing NFT. So there is a kind of a gap that needs to be filled with great education and access to platforms that make it easier for people to not only buy NFTs, but also create them and think about that design process. But what I would say is that there are platforms, many emerging ones, things like Sound.xyz is a great one to check out. Right? It's got sound.xyz, and they have a huge influx of new unknown artists that are monetizing NFTs on a daily basis. Every week you'll see interesting new drops and assets that are being sold, in some cases for thousands of dollars. And most of those artists do not exist in the traditional paradigm of music. They may not even be distributing their music on Spotify, but they're using this new canvas because there is a community of collectors that are really interested in what this new format means. And you know, it's interesting from, I think, from an emerging artist perspective. I was kind of talking about it earlier today. This space is, right now, it's really exciting for artists that see themselves as more than just musicians. I think it's really exciting for artists that see themselves kind of existing in this gray area where they're technologists as well as musicians and kind of like to dive into the concept or some of the underlying ideas behind their work to be a bit more conceptual. Ultimately, I think those are the artists that we're seeing really do like exceptionally well and kind of cut through rather than just launching like a JPEG or something a little bit more traditional. So I think whether it's emerging or established, the opportunity right now is pretty huge to really kind of recreate the rules. And a lot of that work is then getting picked up because there's not that much noise. Although there's a lot of noise in NFTs, to do a groundbreaking NFT project that becomes the first of its kind happens every day right now because, like I said, it's so blank, it's so empty. Like, this is new technology that it's been around for a while, but only really kicked off last year in January. So we're looking into this new future, but it's still undefined. And I think the opportunity for artists to carve a path for themselves is arguably easier right now than it may be in about 3 years in the NFT space, just because of the fact that this is so new. And all it takes is one different perspective on how you might think about a smart contract to create the best project of the year, which is, I think, what many people are really excited about, is that complete freedom to define the space without necessarily being tied to best practice case studies.
I have a question more about the production of the actual NFT or whatever creation is being made. Is it up to, like, for example, I'm a producer, is it up to whoever is the artist to produce it, or can platforms like Pixelynx help on creating the actual assets?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a large portion of the space requires collaboration. Many artists don't necessarily have the tools or the skills, because why would you, to create 3D content? Like, you've spent your life focusing on, making great music, and we don't necessarily suggest artists to take the eye off that. So I think collaboration is key. The way we work is, a lot of the time we still work with the artists to say, you should have the concept and the vision, and we can help you amplify that. So if there's a new release that's coming out, let's go deeper into what that is. Let's talk about the artwork and how can we bring that artwork to life using this new dimension and this new canvas. So a lot of it usually starts with just mood boarding. Really, it's like the first step is, okay, we kind of know what the canvas is. For us, we have augmented reality, we have this platform, so we kind of know what we can do. But the first step is, let's mood board ideas. Let's kind of figure out what the album art is trying to say, if it's already made, and if there is no album art, what kind of concept could we bring to life using this new platform? And then a lot of that is like a two-way discussion, where we'll then help our partners, we'll create assets. But there's other artists that we work with who have formed kind of collectives around themselves, and I think highly recommended strategy is having this collective of 3D artists and maybe even NFT smart contract designers. You can then work together to kind of figure it out, and then you're just distributing content through our ecosystem, but you still have full control in the whole design process. So it works in different ways, but I definitely recommend becoming part of communities that you can tap into, whether that's your own collective or just being part of a broader creative ecosystem, for sure. Cool. Any other questions? No? Cool. Well, I think, as I kind of mentioned earlier, I think the opportunity in the space, as you can kind of gauge, it's huge. I mean, we could talk for days and hours about different ways to think about NFTs and immersive experiences and how you would be able to use this as a way to release your music. I think that what we speak to a lot of artists about is just dive in and experiment, maybe create an alias just to experiment if you wanted to put some stuff on the blockchain, because it is public, and that stuff is technically there forever in some ways. But definitely start just experimenting. I think it makes a lot of sense to just dive in terms of seeing what all of these different platforms are and thinking about how you could release your content and your experiences through this. And as you start to do that, I think working towards it can seem overwhelming, but having a long-term vision around how you want to use this technology is really interesting, because those original owners of your NFTs are like your investors to some extent, right? They've bought into you as an artist, not just as buying a piece of music, but they technically own this thing. They can sell it. They have more ownership over that NFT than they've ever had anything else in your artistic career, because when they're listening to music on Spotify or another platform, it's they don't technically own it. It's disposable in many ways to them. Like, it's maybe a great song that sits on a playlist, but that's all it is. An NFT for me is an example of building a long-term relationship with a fan. It's those original owners, you can continue to give them value. You know who owns your NFT, so you can do something called an airdrop, which is like a free drop of an NFT to their wallet, and you can only do that because you know who the NFT holders are. So there's a lot of interesting things to explore there in terms of nurturing that initial group of people who bought your first NFT, because the chances are they'll be the ones that will continue to buy more and more. And so you can think about, of course, doing drops and amazing immersive experiences, but also have an idea around how this could form part of a real interesting long-term strategy as an artist. And that's a fine blend of thinking about the artistic experience, but then also just the fan relationship. And how does a fan owning that NFT unlock, new ways for you to connect with your fan base, essentially. So super exciting. I think the space is huge. Yep.
Do you have the names of kind of other platforms or blockchains that, say, artists are releasing on? Say if you're like only just starting out, like OpenSea, minting prices, gas prices, obviously very, very high.
Sure.
If you're wanting to kind of just, just start dabbling, with the kind of just putting stuff out there, do you have like examples of, where people are doing that?
Yeah, for sure. There's so many. I think it's interesting because if you even just Google music NFTs now, you'll see dozens of platforms launching every single day. There's so many, but OpenSea, of course, is like one of the largest because of trading volume, but it's not necessarily like music focused. There's some really cool ones that I mentioned, SoundXYZ. I think that's a really fascinating one. There's a platform called bronze.ai, which you should check out. It's, again, a very fascinating AI-style technology that allows you to create dynamic music. So essentially what you do with Bronze is I love it. It's so interesting. You upload your songs, but you upload them in this file format where it basically has your stem files in the actual format that you send to them. And what the Bronze tool does is it creates a variation of that song every time you listen to it. So sometimes the bass line might be filtered out, or it's small variations. Like you can't really tell. And they did an example with J. Paul, I think. It's with J. Paul. And you can go to the website, and it's a different version of that track every single time you click refresh. But so subtle, and sometimes quite obvious, actually, but it sounds amazing. I mean, every single version of that track sounds absolutely killer because of what that algorithm is doing. So there's so many. Like there's some where you go really far down the rabbit hole with things like Bronze, where they're just super smart AI kind of formats. And then you have others like SoundXYZ and OpenSea and so on, which are more traditional music NFTs. You kind of sell it as a video file, and it's kind of it. But to me, sound is probably one of the best examples. And yeah, there's so many. I would definitely, what I'm seeing with a lot of artists in the NFT space is they're actually launching on different platforms for different things and just experimenting. And that's really what we've done even over the last year is, we sold, 15,000 NFTs last year, which is, a decent amount. And we tested every single platform to try to figure out what were the nuances behind each community and what would make some platforms more relevant for certain types of NFTs versus others. So I think experimentation at this stage is pretty important. And then you can make a decision as well. Are you selling one-off ones? Are you selling like editions where it's like 1,000? So there's a lot of things to decide before you jump into like the platform specifically.
Yeah, because I say I really like the ReadyPlayer.me. For me to be able to create that like for free. To say if I wanted to use that and then create my own kind of NFTs from that, different designs, say my avatar, for instance, is that something I know because I haven't created the original avatar. Is that something like I can do, for instance, like that's the building on top, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I think that kind of stuff, absolutely. And then it's just, I guess breaking down the creation flow. So you have like, I guess, the creative idea, which you can start with in a number of different ways, whether it's, looking at ReadyPlayer.me and saying, I'm going to start with this platform and this asset because that's what I want to build from. And then kind of design your way forward. And sometimes you can design your way backwards. Like, we've worked with some projects where they don't really know what the asset is in any shape or form. They just know what the experience they want to create is. So they know that they want 10,000 fans to own this NFT, and they want those fans to maybe earn royalties from the ownership of that NFT. So when anytime it's sold or like there's revenue made from a single, those fans are going to be able to participate in some of the royalties. So it's a lot of the time, you kind of play around with it a little bit. Like, what's the function that you want to deliver with this, and what's the value or the utility that you want to create for a fan, and then you can kind of figure out, what's the best way, what's the platform, what's the asset, and what's the smart contract. Any other questions? No? Cool. Well, thank you. We're around as well if you have any questions. Definitely check out the Pixelynx website. And yeah, I'm super excited for, I think, all artists in this space, like whether it's emerging or established. I think everyone is, I've been speaking to so many people, and almost everyone feels like they're looking at the music industry for the first time. That's generally the kind of consensus, and for many different reasons. They're excited because of the formats and the assets and the relationship that this technology will create with their fans. So definitely embrace it. Thank you.